I pushed the door open with my shoulder, the way I used to when my hands were full of groceries and my husband was still alive to call out from the living room. The hinges still creaked in the same tired rhythm. I stepped inside quietly, carrying a small basket of late-season tomatoes, just something I thought Mira might like for dinner. The smell hit me first. Not the warm, buttery scent I remembered, but something sharp and overcooked. Mira stood at the sink, her shoulders tight, her head bent low. Water ran over her hands, but she wasn't washing anything. She was crying quiet, careful tears that slid down without a sound. The kind a woman learns to cry when she doesn't want the house to notice. Before I could say her name, a voice cut through the kitchen. "You're not allowed in here." A woman I had never seen before stood by the stove, stirring a pot that did not belong to her. She didn't look at me fully, just a side glance. "Sharp enough. This is for family," she added, as if the word were an iron gate between us. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. This was my kitchen once. Mine and my husband's. I could still see his boots by the back door, the marks he left on the floorboards after long days in the fields. But now, a stranger stood in his place, blocking the counter with her purse and her presence. I blinked slowly, letting the room come into focus. In the living room, two more unfamiliar faces lounged on my old furniture, laughing at something on the television. Someone called out, asking when the maid was going to bring more tea. Mira didn't turn around. She didn't even wipe her face. She just reached for a wooden spoon and moved to the pot on the back burner, stirring as if she were part of the stove itself. I set the basket of tomatoes on the counter quietly, so it wouldn't be heard, and stepped further into the room, feeling the cold edge of something rising inside me. Something I hadn't felt in years. I looked at Mira's trembling hands, at the strangers filling the space where my family once stood, and knew I needed to understand how this had happened before I spoke a single word. After Thomas passed, I locked the front door and swore I'd never step foot on this land again. The house felt hollow without his voice in it. The silence turned the walls to strangers. I let the weeds take over, let the roof rot and the gate sag. Grief made it easier to leave it all behind. But then Mira's first marriage cracked apart like dry clay. She came back to me smaller than she left, carrying nothing but a suitcase and a child's look in her eyes. I couldn't watch her start over in some rented apartment with paper walls and broken blinds. So I went back to the place I ran from, peeled back the ivy, and began again. I sanded the windowsills. I fixed the well pump. I planted basil and fennel where the mint used to grow. I poured every spare dollar into making it hers. When I handed her the keys that day, she cried. We sat on the porch and watched the wind carry dust across the field. She promised it would just be her. Quiet. Safe. Healing. Now. The walls are full of noise. The couch has permanent dents from Robert's brothers. Rosalind has taken over the pantry like it's her personal larder. Someone hung a garish calendar over the painting I left in the hallway. They call it temporary, but I can smell permanence in their coats by the door. I found Mira in the laundry room, folding towels with practiced urgency. She jumped when she saw me, and then smiled too quickly. Her voice was a whisper. I'm not supposed to leave the kitchen until dinner's done. Rosalind gets upset if the rice sticks. She said it like a fact, like weather. Not fear, not anger, just how it is. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away to check the dryer. I stood there, not knowing which was worse, that she didn't ask for help or that she no longer believed she could. I went to the barn that night, needing to see if anything we built still belonged to us. Night settles quickly in the valley, the kind that makes sound travel farther and thoughts sit heavier. I slipped out to the barn after dinner, needing air that didn't carry someone else's orders. The old door dragged across the dirt the way it always had, and for a moment, I almost expected Thomas to step out from behind a stall with a lantern and that quiet smile of his. The shadows folded around me, but the beam above the feed shelf caught just enough moonlight to reveal the carving, L&T, 82. I reached up and traced the grooves with my fingertips. The wood had dried over the years, but the letters still held the warmth of memory. It felt like a reminder or a warning. Something scraped under my boot. I looked down at the workbench. One of Thomas's wrenches was missing. The space where it always sat was bare, a clean rectangle where dust hadn't settled. It wasn't valuable, but it was his. He used it to fix the gate the summer we thought the world was good and steady. I closed the drawer a little too hard. Inside the house, I checked the linen closet next. The floral quilt I'd stitched when Mira was born gone. In its place sat a stack of cotton sheets that didn't belong here. My pulse tightened in my throat. I moved room to room, opening cabinets, drawers, half expecting to see everything I once touched replaced by things loud and unfamiliar. In the hallway cabinet, I found my overnight bag, stuffed behind holiday decorations, zipped shut, smudged with dust. Before I could ask, Mira appeared at the doorway, wringing her hands. "They said you might confuse things," she whispered. "Take something that isn't yours by mistake." For a moment, neither of us breathed. She wouldn't meet my eyes. The shame in her posture wasn't hers to hold, but she carried it anyway. I didn't trust my voice, so I said nothing. I only pressed my hand against the folded canvas of the bag, grounding myself in the one truth I could still feel. I was losing this house, inch by inch, and none of them even bothered to pretend otherwise. I closed the cabinet and knew I had to see the paperwork. I found Mira sitting at the edge of the porch after everyone had gone to bed, her hands tucked between her knees as if she were trying to keep herself from shaking. The night air was thin and cool, but her face was warm with exhaustion. I sat beside her, leaving just enough space so she wouldn't feel cornered. "Mira," I said quietly, "is the house still in your name?" She blinked hard, the way people do when they're trying to keep from crying again. I think so." Her voice was a thin thread. "Robert said refinancing would help us lower payments. Better rates." She rubbed her palms together. "I signed the papers he gave me. I didn't think twice. I thought it was normal. I wanted to reach for her hand, steady it. Instead, I let my own rest still in my lap. "Did you read what you signed?" She shook her head. "He said it was just formalities." Formalities. The same word Thomas used when we bought this place 40 years ago. Except back then, we read every page like it could collapse in our hands. Mira's gaze drifted to the fields, where the moonlight hit the fence posts we rebuilt after a storm one summer. She whispered, "Mom, did I do something wrong?" "No," I said firmly, "but I need to check something." When she finally went to bed, I drove into town. The bank's nightlights cast long shadows on the floor as I opened my safe deposit box. I searched through the folders until I found the copy of the refinancing form, the one Mira should have signed, but didn't. My stomach cinched tight. Her signature was there, but slanted, uneven, nothing like her real hand. And below it, a second name, in sharp, looping letters, Rosalind Shaw, listed as co-owner. The air felt colder than the vault. I sat on the small metal chair, the pages trembling between my fingers, and understood the danger Mira had been living with long before dinnertime commands and stolen quilts. I closed the folder carefully, slid it back into my bag, and knew there was only one person I needed to speak to next. I kept the car running a moment longer after pulling into the driveway. The porch light was off, the curtains drawn, but I knew none of them would be sleeping easily tonight. Not after what I'd seen. Inside, I moved quietly. The house made different sounds now, voices echoing off new walls. Laughter that didn't belong, but beneath it all, The bones were still mine, ours, upstairs. I locked the bedroom door and opened my own folder, the one no one knew about, the one I'd kept separate from everything else since the day I gave Mira the keys. They thought they were clever. They thought a photocopy of a forged document was enough to undo history. But I never mailed the official transfer, never signed the deed. The property was still, in the eyes of the county and the state, mine. Tucked inside the same folder was the most recent version of my will. I'd updated it after Mira's divorce, when I first saw the fear in her eyes and knew she might fall into something worse. Page 7 held a clause I had written in simple, firm language. Any attempt to alter or refinance property without my direct approval would be considered void. They hadn't touched these papers. They didn't even know they existed. They were too busy moving furniture and rearranging cabinets, too confident that a tired mother and a weeping daughter wouldn't push back. I placed the documents neatly back inside, sealed the folder, and slid it beneath the loose board in the floor where Thomas used to keep his rifle. Then I lay back in bed and stared at the ceiling. Do I step in? I whispered, or let her drown politely. It wasn't a question for myself. It was for Thomas, though I knew he wouldn't answer. He never liked conflict, but he always believed in protecting the ones who couldn't raise their own voice yet. Mira wasn't weak, but she was buried under guilt, under pressure, under people who smiled as they took everything. I turned toward the nightstand and reached for my phone. There was someone who needed to see those papers. I made the call just after dawn. The house was finally quiet, and the fields outside were washed in pale light. The deputy answered on the second ring. His voice hadn't changed much, steady, polite. The way Thomas always said a man should speak when people were looking to him for help. We agreed to meet at the station before lunch. He walked into the small interview room with a smile that faded the moment he saw the folder in my hands. "Ma'am," he said, pulling out a chair, "you brought paperwork." I laid out the unsigned deed first, then the forged copy Mira had signed under pressure, and finally the clause from my will, printed in plain black ink. His fingers hovered over the signatures before he blew out a long breath. "Whoever did this," he said, "thought you wouldn't fight. They don't think I can." I replied, "Or that I will." He studied me for a moment, as if remembering the way Thomas used to stand on the sideline of the Little League field, quiet but immovable. Then he nodded. "I'll take care of it." The rest went fast, faster than I expected, faster, maybe, than I was ready for. By the next afternoon, his patrol truck rolled down our driveway. I watched from the window as the dust rose behind his tires. He parked exactly where Thomas used to leave the farm truck, stepped out, and adjusted his belt before walking up the porch steps. Robert's father opened the door. He wore that same smirk I'd seen since the first dinner, like he already owned the view from the kitchen window. It vanished the moment the deputy introduced himself and handed over the folded notice. The man's jaw dropped. He tried to speak, but the words tangled. His eyes darted past the deputy, toward the living room, toward the kitchen, toward anything that might save him. Nothing did. I stayed where I was, listening to the rise and fall of their muffled voices, the scrape of a chair being pushed aside, the shuffle of hurried feet. Then I stepped away from the window, knowing what came next. I met them at the threshold. The deputy stood just behind me, steady and calm, the papers still in his hand. Robert's mother, Rosalind, was halfway through a complaint before I even opened my mouth. "You can't do this," she barked. "We repainted that bathroom. We bought furniture for the front room. That dining table, it's ours." I tilted my head. "You're right," I said softly. "I'm not the one asking you to leave." Rosalind narrowed her eyes, confused until I stepped aside, and Mira appeared in the hallway behind me for the first time in weeks. She stood straight. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice, when it came, wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. "I want them gone," she said. The words hit like a pane of glass cracking across the center. Robert looked stunned. He stepped toward her, arms out. "Mira, don't do this. It's just been tense lately. We can fix this." "No," she said. "You lied to me. You put her name on that deed. You let your mother humiliate me in my own kitchen. You don't get to ask for time." The deputy didn't flinch. "You have 2 hours," he said firmly. "Pack what you brought. Nothing more." Robert started to argue. His father muttered something under his breath about lawyers and property lines. But Mira didn't look at them. She kept her gaze on the floor, steady as stone. Rosalind turned to me, lip curled. "You're tearing this family apart." I looked back at her without blinking. Then maybe it wasn't much of a family. She scoffed, arms crossed, but said nothing more. I walked past them to the coat rack, unhooked Mira's cardigan, one I hadn't seen her wear since the day I handed her the keys, and passed it to her. "Ask her if you can stay," I said to the room, and not a soul answered. I took Mira's hand and led her outside, into the air that had finally begun to feel like ours again. They moved through the house like shadows, stuffing drawers into suitcases, knocking over things they never cared enough to clean. The living room was a maze of half-zipped bags and overturned baskets. No one spoke. Not to me, not to Mira, not even to each other. I stood at the front door with my arms crossed, not blocking the way, but not moving either. Rosalind came toward me with a bag in each hand and her mouth pulled tight. "At least let me take my clothes," she hissed, eyes flashing like I was denying her air. I didn't look away. "Ask your son." She turned to Robert, who was dragging a suitcase behind him with the grace of a man who had never lifted anything in his life. "Robert," she said, voice high and sharp, "tell her I need my things." He paused, glanced between the two of us, then lowered his head and kept walking. That silence said more than any defense ever could. Mira was behind me, quiet, but not invisible anymore. Her shoulders weren't slumped. Her chin was lifted, and when Rosalind brushed past her, Mira didn't flinch. She didn't move aside. She stood still, like a door that wouldn't be opened again. They made 3 trips. No one offered to help. One of the brothers muttered something about suing. I didn't even turn around. They weren't the first men to confuse entitlement with ownership. Rosalind walked out last, one hand gripping a plastic bag full of what looked like expired pantry items, the other still dragging her dignity behind her like a coat that no longer fit. The deputy nodded to me on the porch. "All done," he said. I didn't thank him. I just watched the car roll down the dirt road until it disappeared behind the trees Thomas once planted. Mira stepped beside me. The house was still. No shouting. No instructions. No footsteps overhead. Just the creak of floorboards and the slow return of something that sounded a little like peace. I turned to her. "Let's clean the kitchen." That night, I didn't leave. I stayed. Not because Mira asked, but because the air inside the house finally felt like something I could breathe again. She brought out the dishes we used to use for Sunday dinners, ceramic with a thin blue rim, chipped at the edge. They hadn't been touched in months, maybe longer. She washed them twice, then laid them out on the table like a ritual. Napkins folded, forks aligned. The silence was soft, not heavy. We ate simple food. Vegetables from the cellar, eggs from the neighbor's coop, a piece of bread each. Mira didn't apologize for any of it. I didn't either. We just ate slowly, like time had changed speed. Later, I helped her carry the spare mattress back upstairs. We rolled it tight, flipped the guest room back into storage. When we passed the hallway mirror, she reached up and quietly removed the framed photo of her wedding. The one with Robert smiling too wide. She didn't smash it, didn't cry, just placed it in a drawer and shut it with care. The next morning, I found her in the kitchen with a can of paint. The pastel pink Rosalind had chosen was already half covered. She didn't ask me what color it was supposed to be, just kept brushing until the wall looked clean again. I stepped outside, found my old gloves in the shed, and returned to the porch. The rose bush Thomas had planted for our anniversary had wilted under neglect. But the roots were still good. I dug gently, trimmed back the brittle parts, and gave it fresh soil. Mira opened the screen door just as I was pressing the last of the mulch down. "You're staying the week?" "Right," she asked. I looked up at her paint flecks on her cheek. Sleeves rolled high, bare feet on the step, and saw a woman who had begun to return to herself. I stood, wiped my hands on my jeans, and nodded. Inside, the table waited. This time, it was ours. The sunroom had always been Thomas's favorite spot. He used to call it the thinking room, though mostly he just read there with his boots off and coffee cooling beside him. That morning, Mira and I sat in the same chairs he once did, quiet, coffee in hand. No need to fill the space with anything but breath. The books were gone, boxed up years ago when grief was still raw, but the shelves still held the shape of them, a memory pressed into wood. Mira tucked her legs under her and stared out the window. The fields were waking slowly, light catching on the dew. She held her cup with both hands like it anchored her to something steady. After a long pause, she said softly, I didn't know how to ask. I didn't look at her. I just nodded, slow and steady. You didn't have to, I said. She let out a breath like she'd been holding it for months. Maybe she had. I thought if I held it together long enough, it would get better. That if I just kept cooking, kept saying thank you, maybe they'd ease up. I sipped my coffee and waited. She went on. But it didn't stop. It just grew quieter, meaner, and I forgot what the house felt like when it was mine. Now I looked at her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't trembling. She was just speaking. Honest and still. It is yours, I said. It always was. She turned to me then, her eyes glassy but dry. You saved me. I shook my head. We don't call it that. What do we call it? I reached for her hand. We call it staying. When someone you love forgets they're allowed to stand up, you just stay close enough until they remember. She smiled. That soft kind that starts in the corner of the mouth and spreads like light. We sat there until the sun shifted, until the floorboards warmed beneath our feet, and until the kettle whistled from the kitchen, calling us not back to pain, but forward into something new.